all around Memphis, from Overton Square to Overton Park, from Le Bonheur Children's Hospital to the Botanic Garden, stand a variety of large-scale, hand-fabricated metal sculptures. Some are simple, some are elaborate, some are brightly hued, some move in the wind, and some move at the touch of a hand. These varied works of public art are crafted by one artist working right here in Memphis, and today you'll meet her. I'm Chris McCoy, and this is a conversation with Yvonne Bobo. We're here in the center of the Yvonne Bobo empire, Off the Walls Arts. This is your studio. This is where she welds and does all the other stuff that she does. Thank you so much for having us letting us in your space today.
Oh, well, thank you, Chris. It's an honor to be recognized and have people interested in what I do. So.
Well, I mean, like we said in the intro, people know your work, right? So how did you get to Memphis? Where are you from originally?
I grew up in Central Florida, North Central, which I call prison country. And it's kind of a rural area with a lot of state prisons. And my only dream was to not live there. And so I went to college in Boston, Boston University. I've traveled a lot in the world. I always say I crossed 2 oceans to get to Memphis, which does not seem necessary, but I was very curious about the world. And then I settled in Memphis in 1999.
So what you do, big monumental public sculpture, there's a pretty high barrier to entry to that art form. How did you get into it?
I think it's just, I'm a very stubborn and driven person. And I think there's no particular training to make me. I was, when I was traveling, anytime I saw an artisan with a skill, I would try to apprentice. I worked as a wood carver in Istanbul, doing Ottoman Empire reproduction. I could do a lot of crazy jobs. So, I would just be like, I want to learn that, and then go do it. Yeah, so, and really large scale sculpture was sort of that way too. I had an opportunity and I jumped in the deep end.
Yeah, just do it. Just do it, right?
Sink or swim, right? Yeah.
Well, so the first big project that you did in Memphis was the Peabody Park renovation, right? When was that?
I believe that I submitted, probably in 2001. Yes, I had been working with Carol DeForest. She was the first artist in Memphis to do the 1% for Art program, and that was being introduced at the time, probably 99, 2000. And they started making calls to artists for parks. Any public building is part of that program, anything that the city of Memphis owns. And it can be Shelby County also, because the school system too.
Yeah. So they're supposed to spend 1% of the budget on,
That's right.
on some kind of art or improvement.
Right, 1% of the construction budget.
Construction budget, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so you did, so you got the Peabody Park gig.
Right, and there was a lot of sort of talk, city council. I mean, I can't remember any of these people exactly, but I can remember one particular person just being like, why would we, pay for art? Nobody likes it or understands it. And I thought, what sort of town am I really, where have I moved to? maybe it was. Town was the operative word there. But I was seemed very narrow-minded about art. And I had been living, in Boston, and I had just come from San Francisco to Tennessee. Also spent a year in Australia, so I was I thought people liked art, I guess. And so we went to meetings. The 1% art was new, and so they were either defending it or condemning it. And people thought, oh, Memphis won't take care of it. We'll just spend all this money, and it'll be a waste. But Peabody Park really transformed. Mm-hmm. It went from a park where people didn't go. There were a lot of, some people were just living on the tracks there, and it just wasn't a place you would take your kids or walk your dog. And now I think it really transformed. Mm-hmm. And I think it speaks to the value of public art and what it can do in a city, like Memphis. It really has transformed many of our parks and public spaces.
Well, my experience with Peabody Park in the last few years has been kids' birthday parties.
Sure.
So that's absolutely has transformed that space,
Exactly.
for sure. Well, you know, you've done a lot of other stuff around town, like we were talking about earlier. You did one of the portals in Overton Park,
That's right, and for the Old Forest.
the Old Forest. Yeah,
Yeah,
and this
through
is the
Overton.
one by the clubhouse, right?
That's right. Yes. So that's the first one. It's the one closest to Poplar.
the one close to Poplar. Yeah.
Yes, and they, you know, the idea, you know, there were 3 artists chosen, and so mine is sort of based on, the Old Forest is a home or a sanctuary for many birds, and it's a treasure in the middle of the city. So my piece is about birds. It's like a flight of birds. It's called Rhapsody. So it's just sort of this exuberant flight. And so I kind of had a bird phase there for a while. So I have a lot of bird themes. So.
Yeah, but it totally. I know exactly the piece that you're talking about, and it's very eye catching. And
It was kind of a funny story because I don't know if you ever visited my other studio, but it had ceilings not unlike these. These are only a little over 11 feet. And so people were like, how do you build such large work in such a small space? And I used to call it like shop in a bottle, you know, like this idea, because I would have to build things that I could not remove from my studio. Then I have to, you know, it's a big giant puzzle, you know, and deconstruct and then reconstruct. And so that is sort of how I would build such large scale. And so when we got to Overton Park to do the portal, we had already built it in the studio and were rebuilding it. So it appeared almost magically in like a day. And so people who jog there regularly were sort of taken aback. They're like, oh, where is this going? And we're like, it's going right here. And they're like, well, how will they drive on the road? I had a conversation with a man about this, and I said, it's a gate. And so people didn't know that it would open and close because it looks like a sculpture, but it's also a functional. So,
yeah.
So that, you know, I'm interested in mechanics, and, you know, I always claim to be a bit of an engineer, although I have no real training other than 25 years worth of building really weird and big stuff.
Yeah.
So, if that was worth anything, right? Yeah.
How do you start? You know, do you start with sketches? How do you even start?
So people laugh. They think I'm kidding. I do start with paper a lot of the time, and I'm always sort of taken aback because sometimes I forget that I can be seen as that seems frivolous that I'm working with paper. Like, why aren't you working with steel or doing something? Because and I was like, because it's very hard to be free with steel. It's very, you know, it's hard to move. It's heavy. You know, it's expensive. You know, so all these things, and so paper. I think I have more freedom in the design stage than once you're committed to a large scale sculpture. You can't just change your mind or make some, you know what I mean? It's very difficult to change course.
It's an unforgiving medium.
Yeah,
steel
it really is. And on this scale too, because you've already committed to materials, you know, and so I build, I'll show you later some of my models around the studio, and I feel like my art stays true to the model, because sometimes I look for pictures of my work in my phone or in my computer, and I pull up a picture of the model at the site, and then I realize that it's not the same. You know, like I mistake them because they look the same.
Oh, wow.
You see what I mean? I'm like, oh, that's my hand under it. That's not really the sculpture. That's me standing with the model going, this is what's going to look like.
Yeah.
And so the model is very important to me. That's how I work. I'm not an amazing illustrator. I don't. I sketch in 3D. I don't. I draw, but only what I've already built. So that's something people find amusing, I guess. Like, I should be able to draw these things. I was like, I can only build them and draw them later, right?
I'm always fascinated with artists' process and how you get to the final product, because I think a lot of people don't think about art in those terms. It's just like you said with the Overton Park piece, from their point of view, it just appeared,
right,
you know, one day, but that was like a year's worth of work for you, right?
Right, yeah, so, and then it just appeared with the help of a little crane and a little lift.
And some engineers and some,
oh yeah,
you know.
Arguing with some engineers, yeah, sometimes, yeah, so, but yeah, sometimes it just, you know, in a couple of days we can install something and people have no idea the time we spend or the bizarre lengths we go to remove it from, you know, because the large work how do you transport it on the road? How do you get it out of your door? When I was in Cooper Young, my door was 42 inches wide. I built Peabody Park. I mean, that is that big solar system is like 9 feet across.
Yeah.
How did I get it out the door? One wonders, right? You know, so it's interesting. You know, to me, I mean, maybe people never think about it.
Yeah.
People who build might, but you know, like maybe even Overton Square, like I don't know, like there are process that I go through that I think are lost many times from the viewer because of maybe they don't know about how to build things. So.
Well, that's the magic trick. That's the
Yeah,
magic
that's
trick.
the magic trick,
You know,
right?
Penn Jillette said, "There's no magic. I'm just willing to go to more trouble than you think it's worth."
I like that. Yeah.
Well, but you mentioned the Overton Square piece, which is one of my favorites of yours. I just feel like it really, and that's on the corner of Cooper and well,
And
right
Madison, right there at the corner. Yeah. I mean, it is truly the corner piece because, of course, the restaurant has their outdoor space, so it kind of moves it just a little west.
But to me, I mean, and a lot of how these, you know, a lot of your work is how do these art pieces interact with the environment that they're in?
It's very important to me. I think as an artist in college, I was very interested in installation work and sort of one of those sort of fantasy jobs though, like you can't really sell installations, you know, like where do, you know what I mean? Like you only see them in museums or whatever, you know, and so that's one thing I try to do here at Off the Walls Arts in the Artist Collective is make a place where we can, you know, create an environment and also with my public art, they're more in the environment, you experience them, you know, like I said, some have movement, they're in your space, you're like spending time with the pieces or you're seeing it, you know, while you're out doing things. You know, it's just like, it has different impact than going to a museum, say, you know, it's sort of more of an environment where you're expecting to see art, you know, so it's different, a different impact.
Yeah,
So,
it's a transformation of the environment. You know?
Exactly, yeah.
And that's what what is the Overton Square piece called?
It's called Gyroscopic, and it's sort of based on fascinated by gyroscopes, of course, and the movement. So it's like a movement, you know, within another movement within a stationary object, and there's a particular twist that it really. That piece really gets activated if the winds are really high. Like there's a motor that turns it and it's also illuminated, but when we have really big winds, there's another part that spins on its own. And and so there's a twist in the stainless is welded into a twist to create a sort of a wind, to direct the wind.
Yeah, and what I really like about it is that if you think, you know, I mean, obviously you've thought about it, but the actual footprint of that piece is not huge, is it?
That's true, and it was one of the factors that, as I sort of bullied my way into the corner there, Lou Loeb was having a meeting with me about putting a sculpture in a part of like down by Bayou parking lot, and because they didn't like a block wall that was there, and I have to say I thought, oh, what a dreadful place to put a piece of art. I was kind of just wanting to back into the block wall and maybe do away with that problem for him. And I was thinking, I was like, I've got to go about this a different way. How can I get a better spot in Overton Square? Like I want to be part of this project. And so I was working on a model where I had a spinning square, and it was inside of a couple of rings. And you know, with Overton Square, playing with that twisted square and playing with the wind moving an object. Some, you know, obviously fans are more efficient at spinning around, but they're not that interesting to look at. At some point, let's try to move something more difficult, something that doesn't naturally spin, and that was interesting at the time. And so I just had a giant model in the back of my truck when I went to the meeting. And Lou was late to the meeting because he was in my truck, like looking at the thing. He didn't know. And so it was this whole thing. And then the project, the restaurant wanted more of the corner space, and there wasn't enough room for the sculpture they had in mind. And then I said, mine only has a 3 foot, you know, the 3 foot footprint. And it's 26 feet tall, and it spins. Yeah. And he was like, well, that's what we'll do.
Sold.
And I was like, it was Exhilarating, because I walked into that meeting going, I am not going to get any work here. Because I'm going to be like, I am not building that other thing. No.
And so you've said to me that you get the most comments probably on the West Cancer Center piece, right?
It is. I think it's because it's such a emotionally loaded piece. You know, people are at a very difficult time, you know, and they're there for periods of time, either getting treatment or diagnostics. And so people sit in the waiting room, and that piece is, I guess, 36 feet tall that you can see, and then there's another 6 feet into the ceiling where the bearings are. And so it's nice when people recognize that, or they come up to me and say something. So it makes me feel nice that it was comforting, or
Yeah, because the people who are seeing that, a lot of them are not having good days.
No. So it's a struggle, right?
Yeah.
Life is uncertain, but I chose that the murmuration because I feel like it's one of those natural phenomena. We watch these thousands of birds flying, in unison, and then people are like, well, why do the birds do it? These birds, what are they up to? And they find shelter and community, safety in numbers, warmth. They're traveling, in seasons, so I feel like it was a very beautiful sort of metaphor for like the journey that these people are on at West Cancer. So.
Well, and then you have a couple pieces of the Botanic Gardens.
Yes. David Lusk approached me. They wanted to invite me to be part of the sculpture garden, which we're all, a generation ahead of me, sculptors, in Memphis. And so I was thrilled to do it. And so I have a piece there that goes over the walkway as you go to the children's area and the gardens beyond. But I also have a mechanical crane there. I call it kinetic crane. And it's sort of based on, like a sandhill crane or just a big bird that flies, but it has a movement, and it goes off once an hour. And the wings, they move up and then they come back down, and it runs for a little while, and then it's stationary in the pond in the main building. So.
We're here in Off the Walls
Right.
Arts. And how did this place come about?
Wow, I kept getting moved out of neighborhoods that artists kind of improve. So like Cooper Young, the Arts District, and then my rent got doubled over there. So then I was out at Memphis Depot for a while, out of Airways, and then I moved to Crosstown, and then I realized that I was about to get moved out of that area too, because the real estate was going crazy because of concourse. It's just a matter of time. And so I said, I've got to buy a building, because everywhere I go as an artist, I make the area better. But as soon as the neighborhood's better, real estate just, moves in, restaurants or high price. You saw it on Broad Street, you see it in Cooper Young, you see it in Crosstown.
See it downtown.
Downtown, just all of us who were there in the beginning, they just, so people who, we got healthcare there now instead of a flea market or recording studio or t-shirt shops. It's just like some of us have had to find new studios. So I said, I'm going to buy something. So I started looking around, and my welding supply house across the street. So I kept seeing this building, and it was in disrepair. So we started investigating who owned it, who was blighting the neighborhood with this building. State of Tennessee. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Southwest Community College and the state of Tennessee, they were the owners.
So this was an electrical
That's true.
component manufacturing
Originally,
plant?
back in the 40s and 50s, this was sort of an electric neighborhood. There were several electric component warehouses. I guess they either made stuff or imported, and that was their specialty. And then it was storage for a long time, and then Southwest bought it, and they were going to make the paramedic school here, I think, and it didn't really fit the requirements for parking, and so it just became a property that they purchased but could not use. And eventually, after 2 years of harassing them, it got before you have to, committees and court, have to vote on it, that they should put it up for auction. And so then we went to blind auction to try to purchase it.
Yeah.
And I was the highest bidder. Yeah.
But it's huge.
Yeah, it's 27,000 square feet.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what was the idea?
So I thought, well, great that I need a space for me, but what about all the other artists who are having the same experience as me, right? People who are renting places in neighborhoods that they don't feel safe, and they're isolated because they're often industrial parks that are no longer occupied by, more industry or corporations or whoever used them to begin with. They're just more dilapidated, and so you find people renting and, and I thought, well, if we have a big enough space, then we all get together. And then, this idea that you would be around other artists, which a lot of us miss that community after college. It's hard to maintain that connection, and so I wanted to create a space where artists could be together and, have a little synergy amongst each other. Yeah, collaborate.
Yeah. And so you have a whole bunch of tenants here in artist spaces.
Right, and then we also have a gallery. We have an event space where we try to do large-scale collaborative pieces where we bring sculpture, music, dance, performing arts, just whatever. Bring it all together and see what happens. Let the community have a space to express itself. We don't really sell a lot of work. We have no funding or agenda, but maybe that's the good part, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. You have freedom is what you have.
We do.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what's next? What are you working on now?
Well, we're currently at Off the Walls. We have our Planet Luminaris. We did a community build in the spring. People would come in and we built this canyon wall, and we worked with Infinity Stairs to do a projection mapping on it. And we've had a lot of different artists participate in 3D exhibits and interactive pieces. That's been some very fun events, and we kind of want to keep with this trend of building our own planet. Like, maybe it's kind of an interesting idea to make a new planet if you don't like the one you're on or something. I feel like it's good to be able to build something and be part of something bigger than yourself, especially, times don't seem good. It's focus your energy in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And it seems to me too that this is all part of everything we've been talking about. You create environments.
Right, and I like to share that process because we do some work with children, and this project we did work with Bellevue Middle, and but when we worked with them before, we built these giant puppets, and then these puppets were part of a parade that we had, a big event, a community event here at Off the Walls. But then University of Memphis, they purchased our puppets to be in a dance production. And then we took the kids to see the dance production with their puppets. So they got to see that something that they built could be part of a much larger art project. And I think that's so uncommon to have that experience, to be a part of something on that scale, especially as a young person. I certainly never was. But maybe it has an impact. Maybe they dream a little bigger.
Yeah, it teaches collaboration,
exactly.
I think, which is really important. I think there's too much emphasis on competition.
Well, that is a shame because there's just not enough resources in Memphis for artists, and we do find ourselves competing. And I do need to mention our Off the Rails project, which is another public idea that we have. My husband, Brendan Duffy, has secured the property that was a decommissioned railroad from Norfolk Southern, which runs from the old Commercial Appeal on Union Avenue all the way back towards what would be Bellevue Avenue. So, and so we sort of tie together the medical district, the Ravine, Sun Studio, to South Memphis, where we have, Off the Walls Arts. We also have Elmwood Cemetery, and then beyond to Soulsville. And so we feel like it's a fantastic opportunity to have art, music, and a place to exercise in the city, a place to interact with nature. We have bunnies and birds, and occasionally wild turkey. Yes.
Wild turkeys?
In the middle of the city, yeah.
Wow, I didn't know we had wild turkeys in the city.
We had one. He was hanging out for about 3 days.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and so we were like, "Is that a wild turkey?" Yes, it is. So it's an ongoing project. We're trying to get support from the city and some funding to develop this. And we're currently up for a Healthy Built Environments grant. And so, because we want to bring farmers markets, exercise, entertainment, all to South Memphis.
Well, once again, creating environments and improving environments. Yvonne, I mean, thank you so much for letting us, into your space today and letting people get a chance to understand and hear about what you do. And I guess we'll see you on the trails, huh?
Exactly. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks. Thank you all for watching. This has been a conversation with Yvonne Bobo. I'm Chris McCoy.